people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
De la noche, Stephanie Piñeiro.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Addressing the potentiality of a Skye Nicolson versus Ellie Scotney fight. Another look. Matchroom promoter Eddie Hearn believes that Skye Nicolson will enter a unification or potentially even a showdown with Ellie Scotney after her next defense. Following her 3 championship victories last year, the World Boxing Council featherweight champion is now gearing up for a clash against number 1 ranked Tiaria Brown on March 22nd. The pair will collide on the undercard of George Cambodia's next outing, with Nicolson 12-0 with 1 KO, hoping to produce a statement performance in Sydney, Australia. Brown, meanwhile, has been clamoring for a shot at the Aussie since last summer, but must now lock horns with the highly skilled technician on away soil. I expect Skye to shut her out. For Skye Nicolson, a statement win. It's staying in character. It's doing to Tiaria Brown what she's done to everybody else. Skye Nicolson is undoubtedly focused on the task at hand. She has nonetheless expressed her desire to become undisputed champion at featherweight. Hanging on to the green and gold belt is a part of that. 7-division champion Amandia Serranio, who currently still holds the WBA and WBO featherweight straps, has been targeted as a possible opponent. However, the 36-year-old, seemingly sitting on the cusp of a trilogy against Irish phenom Katie Taylor, IBF champion Nina Menke, is perhaps a more realistic option for Nicolson. But while the 29-year-old is determined to reign supreme over her division, she could equally turn her attention towards a dust-up with the unified super bantamweight champion Scotney, 10-0. The Brit called out Nicolson shortly after her comprehensive win over Miyamoto last month, admitting that all the biggest fights for her are up there at featherweight. But still, Hearn, who promotes both champions, remains unsure as to which path Nicolson will take. I think Ellie against Skye is a great fight, Hearn told Boxing News. Skye wants to unify the featherweight division, and Ellie's already unified at super bantam, so part of me would like to see Ellie become undisputed. But I also know it's very tight for Ellie to make 122. I wondered about that. So she will be making a move to featherweight. The aim for Skye, of course, is to unify, but a fight against Ellie Scotney would be one of the top fights in women's boxing. I wondered how well Ellie Scotney's been making 122. All this talk about moving up to feather and facing Skye Nicolson, is it because it's getting hard for her to make 122? And it would seem, based on Eddie's comments, that it is. Would be unfortunate to see Ellie Scotney leave the super bantamweight division without realizing that dream first, that goal of becoming undisputed champion, but it really does boil down to safety, and how safe is it for her to keep making 122? If it's getting difficult, if it's getting tight to make 122, you gotta do what you gotta do, and if Ellie were to leave the super bantamweight division for featherweight, she would take all the money with her. The other 2 champions that are there are not with a major promotional outfit, and what we've seen in other divisions with a similar dichotomy is the champions choose to stay away from each other since nobody's putting up enough money to get them in the ring. So what if Ellie Scotney moves up, vacates the 2 alphabet titles she's got at super bantamweight? Who's in line? Makia Krebs, that's who. Via the IBF, Makia Krebs is currently ranked at number 1. She's got a fight coming up against an opponent that has yet to be announced. In a situation where Ellie Scotney moves up and drops the blue belt, it would seem that Makia Krebs is in a pole position to become this division's next IBF champion in that scenario. Former WBO champion Sigolene Lafarve of La France is ranked right behind her at number 2. She's number 2 via the IBF, but she's number 1 via the WBO. Situation like that, I could see Sigolene prioritizing fighting for the WBO title if it goes vacant, than fighting for the IBF and potentially having to come to America to do it? I don't think so. Ranked right behind Sigolene via the WBO is the United Kingdom's own Tyce Gallagher. Want to keep an eye on her. Miyamoto, who Ellie Scotney just fought and beat, is ranked at number 3 via both the IBF and the WBO. So you want to keep an eye on her too, that in a situation where Ellie drops both belts, Mia is still in the mix. Now might be a good time for Ramla Ali to make a comeback. Ramla Ali, who was last in action opposite the ring WBC champion Jamie Mercado some months ago, dropped a decision. If Ellie is leaving the division and potentially dropping her 2 alphabet titles, now would be a good time for Ramla to come back, get in position to potentially pick one up. I would recommend Sigolene Lafarge. I would recommend going the WBO route.
Why the WBO?
Because she might run into Makia Krebs via the IBF, and I think Ramla's all right, but I don't think she beats Makia Krebs, whereas Sigolene Lafarge, Tyce Gallagher, those are more winnable fights.
She can beat them.
I think she can. And now might be a good time to come back. We haven't seen her since June of last year. June. It's been a while.
It's a long break.
And that's what's going on at 122. What could be going on. In men's light heavyweight news, David Benavidez posted this image to his Instagram account with a caption that reads, "Shout out to the bro Jake Paul for having us on the podcast today. It was a dope conversation. Stay tuned for the episode." You can take one good guess who they spent that episode talking about. They were talking about Canelo, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
For David, this doesn't even make sense anymore when you think about it.
And for Jake, he's only making it more obvious. He's only really giving it away how much he needed that fight with Canelo Alvarez to bring a big event to Netflix, because if you're still talking about it, if you're still harping about it, you must not have found a replacement yet. And Canelo in this situation would be hard to replace. There are not a lot of guys that bring as much marquee value to the table as he does.
And I really don't expect Jake to be happy that he was given the runaround, that he basically got played.
How do I know he got played? Turkey LL Sheik's own comments. That's the giveaway.
Pay attention to what he said.
Was this fight with Jake Paul in your minds going to happen unless you stepped in last night at the last minute?
It was big offer for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't match this offer.
There it is. That's what gives it away, that it was never actually Canelo's intention to face Jake Paul, to go through with that fight. He was only using that to get a better deal from Turkey.
But how was it better if Turkey didn't match it?
Because Canelo turned what was a 3-fight deal that starts in September into a 4-fight deal that starts in May. Pay attention.
I don't match this offer, to be honestly. Then he said to me, "Brother, you know, from my inside, I don't want this fight ever. But I said to you, take the May fight. I don't have something in the table and I must fight before Crawford." And we discuss, and in 5 minutes, we closing the deal.
Do you got it? Do you understand? It was never Canelo's intention to face Jake Paul, apparently, but he did use him as a bargaining chip to have Turkey pick up his May fight, his May date.
Effectively turning what was a 3-fight deal in September into a 4-fight deal that starts in May.
Doing so by leading Jake Paul along and giving him the impression that they would fight in May. Serious conversations, serious talks with Jake Paul, not so serious to Canelo.
Because he was never going to fight you. He was just using you, and as stated, I don't expect Jake Paul to be happy about that.
But the longer you carry on about it, the more you talk about it, the more obvious you make it, Canelo's hard to replace. You claim that your next fight is going to be bigger than his? Who are you fighting?
Better be somebody good.
Why don't you fight David? He's a big boy. If what you want to do is show up Canelo Alvarez, why don't you fight the guy that you claim he's ducking? If you really want to stick it to him, if you really want to show him up, why don't you do that? David looks to be walking around at about 200 and change in that picture.
He can fight you at cruiser.
And it works out for him because he plans on fighting Zurdo Ramirez at cruiserweight anyway. You guys do your thing, sell a bunch of tickets, get a bunch of views, make a bunch of money. It works out for everybody.
Do it in Vegas.
Yeah, David Benavidez, he's a Vegas fighter. He's a guy.
Why don't you do that?
I wonder if that suggestion was made at any point during that podcast, David Benavidez's sit-down interview, or is it that Jake would only fight someone who's in their mid-30s if they are noticeably smaller than he is?
Oh, well, that's not fair. He fought Tommy Fury.
Yeah, and Tommy Fury's terrible. Tyrone Woodley, Ben Askren, these are MMA fighters, not boxers. Do we really gotta do this? Run down the itemized list of angles that we've seen from Jake so far? The only way he would share the ring with somebody as experienced as Canelo, as good as him, is if they're substantially smaller than he is.
It's not a knock on him, but you can see what was going on there.
So did at any point in the time that you sat down with David Benavidez make the recommendation that maybe you and him should fight? Since he walks around at cruiserweight, he basically is a cruiserweight, and so are you. You can use Canelo quote-unquote avoiding the both of you as the marketing angle. That could be big. Jake Paul versus the Mexican Monster.
Come on, you know he didn't do that.
And I know he's not going to, but I can see what Jake Paul is mad about. I get it. For David Benavidez, this doesn't even make sense anymore. Calling out Canelo.
It's going over people's heads.
You're so close to fighting for undisputed at light heavyweight, where Canelo doesn't campaign, for a big bag because we know the turkey pays well. Why are you still focusing on a guy who's not at your weight?
You told Marcos Villegas you're not making 168, not even for Canelo.
In terms of moving back down to 168, is that out the window now?
I'm not going back down to 168. I don't care if Canelo, if he wanted to fight me and told me to go down to 168. I don't care about that money. I don't care about none of that.
Why are you still talking about him? Why are you still calling him out? His next two fights are at 168, where you won't go down.
You have no leverage to bring him up.
Literally have no bargaining chips, nothing to bring to the table that would see him move up to 175. The most you can hope to do is fight the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, but you're more focused on Canelo, who you say is afraid of you.
And your fans do too.
He left you hanging, he left you high and dry at 168 the whole time you were mandatory challenger, the whole time you were the #1 contender. So what's changed?
Nothing.
And this is why it doesn't even make sense anymore. You're on the cusp of fighting for undisputed, for a lot of money, but all you keep talking about is this guy you say is afraid of you. Well, if he's afraid of you...
If he's that scared, then isn't it time to move on?
At minimum, you know you're not going to get him this year. All of this year, that ain't going to happen. Skull is next, then Crawford after that.
So shouldn't you be putting pressure on the sanctioning bodies and the fighters themselves and Artur and Dimitri that you've got next? Isn't that what you should be doing?
So, but yeah, that was a good fight though, Coach. I ain't gonna lie. But I say the knockdown, Coach. I seen the replay. You know, Morrell, he hit him in the shoulder.
Yeah, he did.
He tripped on his foot. I ain't see his Benavidez in the face though. You feel me? But yeah, of course. And another one too. Hey, I ain't gonna lie, Coach. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on the Benavidez and Beterbiev. I think stylistically Beterbiev too small for Benavidez.
Now, how could he be too small for Benavidez, but not too small to stop Alexander Vosdik?
Benavidez didn't stop.
Who's literally eye level to David Benavidez. He looks to be about 1 or 2 inches taller than David Benavidez.
David couldn't stop him. Artur did.
Did you miss it? You must have, if you think that, stylistically, Artur is too small for David Benavidez.
I feel like Beterbiev chin has been tested. I mean, Bill ain't punch like Benavidez, so why didn't Beterbiev get hit? Why didn't Benavidez throw combination at his own face?
Through combinations at Caleb Plant, through combinations at Vosdik, at David Morrell, he didn't stop any of them. And those guys can't punch like Artur.
You should be asking what happens to David if Artur cracks him, if Artur punches him.
How he gonna be at? You feel me? And I feel like he's smaller than Morrell. Morrell's big and solid.
Well, Morrell's tall. Maybe he's taller and longer than Artur Beterbiev, but he's not stronger. How do I know?
Because they both fought Radovanje Kalajic.
When Artur fought Radovanje Kalajic well over 5 years ago in 2019, he stopped him in 5 rounds. That's all it took, 5 rounds.
Over 5 years later, David Morrell faces an older Radovanje Kalajic, and he can't stop him. He can't knock him out. He can't even knock him down.
There are some people out there that think Radovanje beat him, but at minimum, most people feel David Morrell didn't even look good in that fight.
So what are you trying to convince yourself of? That David Morrell was a tougher test for David Benavidez than Artur would be?
Beterbiev a little smart, and he's 40 years old. And
I can't. I can't wait. I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to see that fight. I hope like hell that David Benavidez, he's the #1 contender. So whoever win this fight, I hope David Benavidez keep true on his promise and fight.
Cool. I think Benavidez stop Benavidez. I ain't gonna lie. Benavidez good though, but I think Benavidez to stop him because I just feel like
I'm still trying to figure out how the guy who couldn't stop Caleb Plant at 168, Vosdick at 175, or David Morrell.
How does he stop Artur Beterbiev, who's never been stopped?
Not yet.
None of those guys that David Benavidez has fought so far at 168 or 175 have the artillery, the punching power, and boxing acumen of an Artur Beterbiev. So where do you get that David Benavidez would stop him?
Couldn't stop Caleb Plant at 168. You're going to stop Artur at 175.
Because of all the light heavyweights he's been stopping? So far, 2 fights into his light heavyweight campaign, he hasn't knocked anybody out yet.
the matchup, he's just too strong, man. I think Benavidez gonna wear him down, throw them combinations. I think he's gonna test his chin too. Y'all was talking about David's chin, but what about Benavidez's chin? Can his chin take his punches? That's what I'm trying to see. So if he can't take Benavidez's punches, he can get down early too.
I mean, Sweet Hands Plant, who's not a power puncher, who can't punch like Artur, he took David's punches for 36 minutes and he was fine.
You don't need to be a boxing expert to know that Artur Beterbiev has a higher KO percentage than David Benavidez. You really don't need to be a boxing expert to be able to see that Artur punches many times harder than David Benavidez.
That's how I see it, you think? So yeah, that's my call. I got Benavidez stopping him too.
All right, salute, fam. All right.
You're watching it happen. You're watching David Benavidez unravel right before your eyes, but you still don't see it. That 2 fights into his light heavyweight campaign, he's not stopping people like he used to at 168. His power there ain't what it was in the last 3 fights in the last 2 years. The only guy he stopped was a former middleweight in his mid-30s.
Demetrius Andrade.
Caleb Plant was a step up for David Benavidez. That's what he was. That was a step up from all the other guys that he had fought up until that point. And you notice he didn't stop him. He didn't knock him out, even though a smaller, older fighter in Canelo Alvarez did. You couldn't stop Caleb.
Didn't knock him out.
Even though he's been knocked out before. You couldn't knock out Vosdick.
Didn't knock him out.
Even though he's been knocked out before. You couldn't knock out David Morrell, even though you promised you would. You said you were going to take his head off. He looked all right after the fight.
It's happening.
His power is waning, and it's happening right in front of you. You just don't see it, or you don't want to. Maybe if you're a former middleweight like David Lemieux or Demetrius Andrade, David Benavidez will seem more menacing and more powerful.
If you were a middleweight.
Maybe then. There are a lot of disputes about whether or not that was a legitimate knockdown in the David Morrell fight. In truth, David didn't look woozy, he didn't have the spaghetti legs, but it was a legitimate knockdown because it was off a punch and both of David's gloves touched the canvas. What really happened is their feet got tangled up.
Poor balance, poor footwork.
Never mind his equilibrium. His footwork is poor, which is why his balance was off. And that's not a new development.
It's not a recent development. He's been that way. When Ronald Gavril knocked him down, what do you think that is?
2017 till now, the same thing keeps happening, and you're telling yourself that David Benavidez is too big and too strong for Artur. The only thing counting against Artur is his age. That's about it, that he is some years older than David Benavidez, though he doesn't appear to be slowing down. He's showing no signs of slippage, and power, as they say, is the last thing to go.
It's not going anywhere.
Not that David Benavidez is the kind of fighter that you have to chase, because he isn't. He comes to you.
Go to Artur.
I'll bet he doesn't. If Artur remains undisputed champion, don't expect David to fight him, because he won't.
He's gonna haul ass the cruiserweight.